Hello everyone and welcome back to the Clutch Chess Finals. It's Fabiano Caruana versus Magnus Carlsen. After game 7 that we've shown in the previous video, Fabiano retaliated, then Magnus again won a game, then Fabiano again retaliated, and now this is game 11. And game 11 as well as game 12 are clutch games. That means that a win in this game is not worth 1 point, it's not worth 2 points, it's actually worth 3 points. So yes, this tournament is weird like that, but whoever wins at the next 2 games, it's really goes a long way for their point count. So without further ado, let's check it out. We will have another Rossolimo as we did in game 7, but with a certain twist. So Fabi again goes for e4. We have c5 by Magnus, knight to f3. Sorry about that. And now knight to c6. We have bishop to b5 again with the Rossolimo, and e5. Again, Magnus goes for the same idea. Castles by Fabi, bishop to d6, again the same as in game 7. And now not the d3 like in game 7, but the immediate c3, making room for the bishop on c2. And also just preparing to strike in the center. So Carlsen goes a6, he kicks away the bishop. We have bishop to a4, b5 and bishop to c2, and only now knight g to e7. And there are a few games where a4 also d4 were played, but here d3 by Fabi is a new move, so already as of move 8 we have a completely new game. So Magnus continues, he remaneuvers the knight to g6, grabs control of the f4 square, prepares the castle, bishop to e3 by Fabi, and now Magnus castles kingside, and now knight b to d2. So continuing development, bishop back to e7. Now, similar to game 7, now you want to play d6 and start developing your queen side. And now bishop back to b3, grabbing hold of this diagonal, but also preparing, sorry about that. Sorry about that. It's amazing how the mailman always arrives when I start recording. But yeah, bishop to b3, preparing bishop to d5 to pin the knight. And it's also a very nice square for the bishop since the c and e pawn have already been pushed. We have d6 now and bishop to d5 now, putting pressure on the knight here. Queen to e8 defending, and now Fabi strikes in the center with d4 as the knight is no longer included in the fight for the d4 square. So e captures, c captures, and now unpinning, rook to b8, and now rook to c1. Fabi brings the rook into the game, prepares, captures, and he's hoping to win a pawn here. And Magnus goes for knight to b4. You could also advance with c4, but for example, if c4, then you do get a nice pawn on c4. However, white can always undermine it with b3, and then you will open up the c file for the rook. So Magnus doesn't enjoy this. So instead he goes knight to b4. He puts pressure on the bishop. However, this does come with the price of a pawn. So d captures on c5. Fabi goes after the pawn. D captures, and now bishop captures on c5. Fabi grabs a pawn. We have captures on d5. Now Magnus wins the bishop, so he does lose a pawn, but he does get the bishop pair. So e captures on d5, and now bishop captures on c5. He gives up his bishop as well. Rook captures on c5, and now bishop to b7. So here Magnus is down a pawn. He no longer has the bishop pair, and he will try to create some sort of an attack against Fabi's d pawn. Now, is this a healthy pawn or is it a weakness? We will see. So knight to b3 by Fabi. He wants to go knight to a5 to c6, and the knight will be just a monster on c6, and if black ever wants to capture it, then white even gets a nice pass pawn already on c6. So queen d7 by Magnus. connecting rooks, and now knight to a5, just going for that knight to c6 square. We have bishop to a8, and now knight to c6. And of course, you do not capture this and allow this pawn to become a monster here. So rook b to e8. Now, as the bishop moved, Magnus claims the e file, and now knight f to d4, preparing queen to f3. Queen to f3 and knight to f5, and the knight will be extremely strong there. So queen d6 puts pressure on the rook, but now Fabi defends it, just b4. And now it's very hard to do anything about this whole central structure, as everything is so nicely protected. So here, rook to e4 by Magnus. Magnus now wants to double up rooks on the e file. And Fabi continues as planned, with queen to f3, preparing knight to f5. We have rook f to e8, and now knight to f5 as planned. And here, it's very dangerous for black. If you're not careful, for example, queen to c3 will put a lot of pressure on black's position. So queen to d7 by Fabi. Now queen to c3 is impossible, as the knight would be hanging here. And there are a couple of ideas that white could go for here. For example, Fabi went for g3. He wants g3, h4, and h5. However, knight to b8 here was extremely dangerous. But then again, it's so complicated that there's no way anyone would calculate this in a rapid game. But I will show it, as it's super interesting. Now, for example, if you go somewhere like queen to d8, then you give up the a6 pawn. So let's say you go queen to a7 to defend the pawn. Now, queen to c3 is possible. You go after the pawn here, f6, and now rook to c7 with a double attack on g7 seems completely winning for black. However, black has knight to f4. And now, if you move the queen anywhere from the defense of the rook here, then just queen captures rook. And if you go for the queen, then knight to e2 check wins back the queen. King h1, knight captures on c3. And the point is, after rook captures on a8, yes, you are up a piece. However, rook to e1, and the white has back rank issues. And now, after knight to g3 defending, you're going to go knight captures on d5. Attacking the b4 pawn as well, and after white defends it, now you just go rook captures, knight captures, and of course knight to b6, winning back your piece. The rook has to move, rook captures on a6, rook captures on b6, and we get this position where Fabi would end up being up a pawn. But it's of course, like I said, a disgusting engine line. No way we see this happen. So g3 instead, preparing h4, h5, and Magnus goes for h6 now. Creating some breathing room for his king, also preparing maybe to remaneuver the knight over to h7, to shift it over to f6 or g5 if needed. So h4, and now king to h8. Most likely a waiting move, but also maybe just clearing the g8 square for the rook if you will at some point maybe need to defend it. However, knight back to e3 now, no longer the g pawn is defended, and now king goes back to g8. Now Magnus no longer sees the need to keep the king on the h file. Rook f to c1, Fabi doubles up on the c file now, and now knight back to f8, preparing knight to h7. So knight to f5, Fabi brings the knight back, and now knight to h7. Now the knight can be shifted to f6, and you no longer really need to worry about any g7 weaknesses. And now, king to g2 by Fabi. There was a knight b8 in the position here, but we're gonna get back to that. So first, Fabi improves the position with king to g2, and Magnus again goes king to h8. And now, Fabi does go for knight to b8. And now it's a very tricky idea, because here, if you go queen to a7, like in the previous line, knight d6 just wins, as there's a double attack on the rook now. So not much you can do here. Also, the two double rooks on the c file are extremely strong here. So Fabi instead went for queen to d8. He keeps an eye on the d6 square, but now knight back to c6. Again attacking the queen, queen back to d7, and knight back to b8. Now we have a repetition of the position. Magnus goes back, queen to d8, and now Fabi does go after the pawn. Knight captures on a6. And okay, Magnus goes for bishop captures on d5, but this doesn't really help him, as now Fabi just goes knight back to c7. And now there's a double attack on the bishop here, and also there's an attack on the rook here, and there's not much you can do about all of this. So Magnus goes back with bishop to b7. You of course give up the exchange, you don't give up a piece. Fabi grabs it with knight captures on e8, and here If you capture the rook, the knight, for example, with this, then just queen captures here. You don't want to give up this bishop. So instead, Magnus goes for not queen captures, but rather rook to e7 first. He first wants to kick away the queen and only then recapture the knight. However, this doesn't really help Magnus, so feel free to pause the video here and try to find the quickest way to win the game for Fabi while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on parting with your queen. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, it's queen captures on b7. Yes, the move that was prevented by rook e7 is actually the way to go. So here Magnus doesn't really have any choice. He has to capture the queen, and now we have knight e to d6. And now this is an excellent square for the knight, guards this one, the knights guard each other. Also you add more pressure to the c8 square, so rook to c8 is coming regardless of what you play. Also, if you try something like rook here, knight captures on f7 check, picks up the queen. So here, sorry, not this knight was played, not that one. Knight e to d6 was played, but pretty much with the same idea. Also guarding this square, if you move the rook, the knight captures on f7 with check. So here, in order not to allow any of this, Magnus played knight to f8 to keep his king safe, but it was also in this position on move 40 that Magnus Carlsen resigned the game, as now he hung a whole rook on b7. So there was just too much pressure, and you couldn't just, you know, fix everything in the position. So here, after knight captures on b7, white has two rooks and two knights for a queen and the knight, which is of course completely winning, and once this rook comes to c8, it's just all over. So that's game 11, the clutch game, which means Fabi wins 3 points for this game, and which means Fabi is now in the lead in the finals of the Clutch Chess International, and also this means that Magnus must win the final game to win the finals. If not, if the game is a draw or Fabi wins the game 12, then Fabi wins the entire event. So that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank Daniel Jones, Christopher Hargrove Burett, Groparty, Peter E. Jones, and Johannes de Ruita for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing with the final game of the Clutch Chess International, where we will see what will happen. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.